back when, in the dim dark ages, when Steve Markroft did his PhD in the early 2000s, he did a lot of work working out when spores in blackleg were released. And typically you can see up there that in the first year after a canola crop's grown, most of the blackleg spores get released. And the thing and then the subsequent years, you see still some spores still in the system, but nowhere near that release that you see in the first year. It's 69 million compared to 1. And the other thing that table doesn't quite capture is that the spores, even though they were released in that first year, and typically in the farming systems that we had back in the early 2000s, we saw that those spores that were released in the first year typically happened in about a month after the opening break of the season. So, and those spores just floated around the district and infected crops across the fence from where that last year's stubble was growing. And so what that meant typically for the canola crop was that a canola crop would be, say, established in the first week of May when on opening rains. The spores would get released after about a month after those opening rains. The spores mature, get released, start blowing around the countryside, and then they'd land on leaves of the emerging plants. That fungus would then infect the plant if it was susceptible, move down, and eventually, as the plant developed throughout the season, would develop a canker in the crown of the base of the plant, gumming up all of the plant's plumbing and reduce yield by reducing flow of water and nutrients to the top of the plant. So that's what's typically happened. And since then, we've got the ability to now sow interrow. And for those of us on Lower Eyre Peninsula, we're lucky enough to have one break crop, and you grow canola and then you grow wheat and then you're growing canola exactly back on the same spot in the same row as where you were growing it a couple of years ago. You're landing yourself in a totally different environment to this situation where we were burning and tilling paddocks previously. And so what that's meant for stubble is that you can see there's two examples here, is now we've got a lot more of this stubble that's been left vertical. And I don't know whether you should be able to pick up those little black dots on the canola stubble there. They're the pignidia, or the fruiting bodies, and that's actually the stuff that fires off and releases the spores into the atmosphere that we saw in in Steve's work previously that would have happened in that period in early June. Now you can see by having more of the stubble left vertical, you don't get anywhere near as many of these fruiting bodies occurring. And so what this meant, this is the work that John McCredden at a pioneer at Wagga did. He found, and by looking at whether the stubble was standing vertically or left horizontally, a lot of those situations where we found more vertical stubble, the blackleg spore release we didn't get as much early in the season. So we didn't see that in the traditional sense, like Steve found in early June. The spores are getting released more evenly and probably even a little bit less over that first year. And so we're not seeing the big bulk of spores getting released in the first year of after growing a canola crop. And the more spore and that getting released over a more even period throughout the growing season. So what that actually means is that now that instead of we're seeing those symptoms where the disease was infecting a small cotyledon of a plant or a small emerging plant, the fungus moving down into the crown of the plant and causing the canker and causing some yield loss that way, we're seeing these range of other symptoms. We're seeing these branch and stem pod type of symptoms. This is being caused by stubble that's more vertical. We're getting spore releases in different times of the year. Also probably because our systems are leading towards earlier sowing as well. And so, yeah, we're seeing more of these symptoms up higher in the canopy.